I think that's an underrated aspect of my show, tackling the specters of years gone by. I mean this in the sense of, do you remember playing a game as a child that you basically farted around in but never finished? Like, your child brain couldn't comprehend the inner workings of the title, so you just kinda tried as much as you could before reaching the breaking point and putting the game down? I've brought it up before as a recurring nightmare I'll have to put to bed at a later time, but Digimon World 2 is one interactive piece of torture that fits that criteria. It isn't alone, despite my wishings that it was, but that brings me to the topic of today. I have fractured and hazy memories of playing Lilo and Stitch for the GBA when I was still up in Ohio. I never actually owned the cart, yet somehow at a family get-together I bore witness to one of the many demons that would wind up latching onto my psyche and spiking my thoughts with randomness. And this is something I have to do. I have to bury this so that it will no longer haunt me. Or whatever cliche BS people say when killing the past. With that said, like, comment, subscribe, and share the video around. Or don't. I ain't your Uncle Nurgle, as I'm more a shade of reddish yellow in layabout mode, or blackish crimson in personified mode, than putrid green all around. There actually is a little bit of history for this game, as while you can surmise that this was a case of Disney wanting a tie-in for their newest movie and got Digital Eclipse to do the grunt work, it's that relationship making this story somewhat interesting. For a brief upbringing on Digital Eclipse, they were a company founded by Andrew Iyer, Hans Kim, John Neal, and Howard Fukuda, with Andrew taking the role of CEO. A resident of Newfoundland, particularly Toronto, as a child, Andrew's father, Miller Iyer, put his son on the fast-track to graduation from secondary school. From the fall 2009 issue of the Andrean, we get this. Back in 1982, the very strong Newfoundland public school system was graduating students in grade 11. Miller Ayer, father of Andrew, 83, was working in Toronto and thought St. Andrews would be the best place for his son to pick up his extra year. Thus, Andrew came to SAC, skipped grade 12, and graduated as a grade 13 student. From there, it was off to Harvard and then onto the thriving gaming world on the sunny West Coast. Law wasn't in the cards. Moving in with his girlfriend who lived in Silicon Valley, Andrew caught the tech bug and worked for a few tech startups before settling on making his own, Digital Eclipse. While originally disconnected from the industry, the tech that Digital Eclipse had been working on had a niche usage that caused them to pivot their direction. Turns out, the company had revamped emulation, able to take arcade classics, port them to what was the hot new shit at the time, and basically revamp them a la what the Dreamcast would be known for before its untimely death. Mike Mika explains to VentureBeat that it was built around the idea of making the first commercial emulations of classic arcade games like Joust, Defender, and Robotron. And boy were they good at it. So good in fact that the code Digital Eclipse wrote up could assimilate itself into a near-perfect, if not perfect, replica of what it was trying to emulate. From Wired's "They do make 'em like they used to" article, nostalgia is a stern master, and I would have walked away from these games if they were not perfect recreations. But they are, and the reason is simple. They use the original Williams source code. According to company president Andrew Iyer, engineers at Digital Eclipse wrote a compiler that emulates not just the Motorola 6809 main processor, but the entire chipset of the arcade games. When launched, Digital Arcade even mimics the graphics tests the old machines performed when powered up. A vestigial limb that warms my heart despite its uselessness. When it came to preserving games, Digital Eclipse had staked out their niche, but soon they would add another carving. 1994. The Sony PlayStation graces humanity as a herald for the coming renaissance of consoles. Digital Eclipse didn't bite. Why? They had already set their sights on a smaller screen, the Game Boy. Back to VentureBeat, the website writes, with Mike adding a few points from his perspective, it was the arrival of the Game Boy Color, a machine based on the same Z80 processor as the older machines, that allowed Digital Eclipse to carve out a valuable niche. When everyone was moving forward to the PlayStation, we were saying, let's do Game Boy, Mike says, and when that platform was a huge success, everyone had to catch up since we probably shipped 60 or so of those games. They had become a juggernaut right under the noses of everyone, wheeling and dealing with a number of well-known developers, such as Midway for the GBC port of MK4, to Capcom for Ghosts and Goblins on Game Boy, to Ubisoft for Rayman Advance, and companies outside the industry. Digital Eclipse were the ones responsible for Little Nicky on the Game Boy Color. Yes, that game is real, and somehow it has some fantastic sprite work. It was probably because of this reliability that Disney sought out a working agreement with Eclipse, beginning with 99's Tarzan on GBC. Impressed, Disney sort of let Digital do whatever they wanted, coming to a head with the topic of today. Mike tells Time Extension the story regarding the two companies' relationship. At the time, we had done so many Disney games, they just stopped paying attention to us. They were like, do something for Lilo and Stitch. And our team really loved Metal Slug, so it was like, we're gonna make Metal Slug with Lilo and Stitch. One problem. Metal Slug's quite violent, causing the publishing half of the effort, Disney in this case, to flip out. There's no way a game where Stitch runs and guns his way through hordes of aliens to rescue Lilo would be made under Disney's dime. That's what Mike says anyway. The team at Disney finally looked at the game and said, we can't show him this. It's too violent. But it was like, whatever. There's no time. It was the next day they had to show it to him, and he wanted to see the game. Who's the him in question, though, for that quote? Oh, no one important. Just then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. But anyone with knowledge of Michael Eisner, whether from personal research or by watching Defunctland, knows that the guy loved to push boundaries at the company. He sought out alien extraterrestrials a theme park ride. Of course he would love Digital Eclipse's Lilo and Stitch, giving them his blessing and kind of bad-mouthing the other games under the Disney Interactive branch for not being as envelope-pushing. Even the heads for the movie were impressed by Digital, gifting them a signed poster as a thank you gift for their efforts. As Lilo and Stitch GBA is a tie-in game, it was released in North America a few days before the movie on June 12, 2002, the EU getting it later in the year, while AU having to wait 3 years to receive it in 2005. Landlocked to the GBA, I booted up my Virtual Boy. Surprisingly, Lilo and Stitch does have its own original story apart from the movie. Hooray! But it fits neatly on a bar napkin. Boom. Basically, instead of Lilo, Nani, and Stitch learning the meaning of Ohana and wacky space stuff interjecting into what is a realistic family drama mixed with slice-of-life elements, the GBA game, as there are a few adaptations for the movie, best being Experiment 626 for the PlayStation 2, brings straight to the forefront the extraterrestrials and makes it a rescue mission / stopping an intergalactic terrorist. Maybe Dr. Pestis is colleagues with Dr. Hamsterville? I'm not too well read when it comes to the background of Lilo and Stitch the franchise, as in post-first movie going into the series, so I don't know if the gerbil was an idea floating around when the groundwork was being laid for the debut, or if Pestis was the first attempt at creating a recurring villain for the Peckleys to deal with. Lilo and Stitch doesn't strike me as a series first kind of series. Like, the first movie was successful to the point that it got a franchise, not because Disney was hoping to make a franchise off of it from the get-go. This does open up an interesting little gash to point at, as I think I forgot to mention it during my TMNT GBA video, but this is the third path that video game adaptations can take. Tell a wholly original story disconnected from what the actual source material is. So you have your Dragon Ball sagas that recap arcs from the show while adding some fluff or streamlining like most game adaptations do. Your Bleach Third Phantoms that tell essentially a filler story to tie over plot elements between major arcs that can, in all essence, be completely forgotten about as it has no impact. I'll raise you one Sopranos road to respect. And then you have Lilo and Stitch that doesn't even bother with canon and does its own thing regardless of what the actual plot of the source material is. You don't really get that kind of adaptation anymore, usually examples A and B, relating this back to TMNT and Bluey respectively, so it's like spotting a unicorn of a bygone age. One where licensed titles were a potluck instead of landing on one of two extremes. We get too many Jurassic Park Evolutions or Suicide Squad Kill the Justice Leagues instead of the spread shot we used to have. I'm distracted by the detail that went into the first James Cameron's Avatar game, or the decency of the Cars games. I think before more Phantoms escape from their confines, I'll move on as this is mostly an excuse plot. About one of the only good aspects of the game, it's one of those videos if you haven't figured out from the top, are parts of the presentation, particularly the sprite work. This is still deep into the era of people caring about how their portable titles look, even for a budget/licensed title, so a lot of the finer details are indeed fine. More than fine. In fact, finer than fine. Terrible joke aside, this is some pretty quality sprite work across the board, not only with our main duo, but with the various enemies they go up against. I do like that Stitch hits that happy medium of terrifying immortal alien experiment, but also cute, lovable furball. When standing still, he has this gnashing, snarling look to him, but then you see him run in this adorable bounce walk that lessens his threatening aura. Like the video game equivalent to those cat pictures that say something along the lines of, "Bitch, I'll cut you," or some Spirit of the White Woman nonsense. And because Stitch can fire in a few directions, you have specific animations for when he's stopped in shooting or moving while shooting. It's all fluid and detail-oriented. To really emphasize this point I'm making, Digital Eclipse actually took the time to slightly brighten up Stitch when firing his pistols, showcasing the muzzle flash of the weapons, or that the bolts fired by the gun are made of light and thus would radiate shooter. Kinda like how in Fear, the muzzle flash from guns generates its own source of light. It's a small detail, yes, but one that captures the inspiration of Lilo and Stitch. Metal Slug. Metal Slug has a numerous amount of tiny little quirks in its sprite work and animation, so for Lilo and Stitch to aim for that level and pay homage to it is impressive. Doubly so since Lilo's levels harken back to slower computer platformers like your original Prince of Persia's. Or, if you want the modern interpretation of that, Oddworld Abe's Odyssey. I didn't pick that up until it was pointed out to me during research, but Lilo's tiptoe walk is exactly like Abe's, hinting that the development team clearly had aspirations that they were aiming for. Continuing with Lilo and sounding like a right psychopath, she has the more inventive damage and death animations, like her reenacting the bit from Home Alone 2 when touching raw electrical outlets, to her getting caught in a bubble when spotted by the slug guards. Again, that's what those classical PC platformers had, quite elaborate death animations, so I think Digital Eclipse hit the nail on the head with what they were going for. But debatably stealing the show are all the baddies, as they have a fun set of animations and details. Like, it feels weird praising grunt walking animations, but I love how the otters rush into place to line up a shot on Stitch, or how the octopi shimmy as if they aren't accustomed to land, while also dealing with carrying a portable mortar. I think before I continue at this point, I do like how varied the actual designs for the aliens are. You have some that look pretty normal, like the otters and octopi, then you have the likes of the tall men on the asteroid. There's a clear distinction from Pestis' forces, as they all rock the standard blue-yellow uniform, while the tall men have a more rustic outfit as if it's a cobbled-together set of clothing. The jetpack flies on the asteroid also lack an outfit, tying that observation together. One aspect that is underrated is how a number of Pestis' forces have an insect motif, particularly the heavy arms the Doctor has at his fingertips. Both the tank and chopper are designed with bugs in mind, the tank a scorpion and the chopper a dragonfly. It gives the army a bit of a theme, like with how the most elite of Pestis' forces are the mosquito troopers, possibly grafted from the large mosquitoes he keeps as prison guards. I honestly think that the only mediocre designs are the jetpack flies, large mosquitoes, and slime boss, because they are quite bog standard, but they make up for it with the animation. Every enemy has a death animation, the best ones being the flies and mosquito troopers, as the latter spiral downward, a death spiral, while the jetpack flies have a beyond incredulous look to them when they get defeated. But all pale in comparison to the slime boss and Dr. Pestis himself. For a simple design, Digital Eclipse put a whole heap of effort into the rippling of the slime boss, like he's an undulating mass that never ceases movement. A Klein bottle, but ooze. What's more, he has my favorite animation in the game, as when he does his side-switching attack, he turns into a hand for a brief second before slamming down. Why did he include this? I don't know, but it looks wonderful. Dr. Pestis might have my favorite looking move in Lilo and Stitch, though. A godforsaken slide kick. Meanwhile, he's this gargantuan-looking metal mosquito that carries a sinister quality. I don't think any other character designed within Lilo and Stitch has ever gotten to that peak, as Pestis would fit more within, say, Contra's Shattered Soldier or Metal Slug 6. This isn't a negative. He has a superb design that punches above the game's weight and makes you forget, oh yeah, this is a Lilo and Stitch tie-in. Unfortunately, I don't have else to say about the rest of the presentation. The music is serviceable yet forgettable, and the Foley work is inoffensive if bland. A shame, as, say it with me now, many run-and-gun games have banging aesthetics matched by killer soundtracks and punchy effects. That leaves the presentation of Lilo and Stitch disjointed. Lilo and Stitch for the GBA is a hybrid of run-and-gun side-scrolling action and stealth, with a few alternate gameplay styles thrown in. Specifically, there are technically 3 vehicle levels and a weird chase stage with its own mechanics. A few of you in the crowd have probably auto-completed in your mind that this looks a lot like Metal Slug or Contra. Metal Slug. Metal Slug has a numerous amount of tiny little quirks in its sprite work and animation. You'd be right if I hadn't already given that away. For those that don't get the hilarity of this, Metal Slug and Contra are both well known for a few facets of their gameplay, one of them being how coin crunchy both are. You die. A lot. So much so that most standard versions of Metal Slug ports default to free play, and Contra has the world-famous Konami code to give the player 30 lives to endure with. Lilo and Stitch has its own version of frayed netting to catch the player, that being the health bar. I say this because I still had to default to save states on the account that health might as well not matter in the slightest. I can handle hard. Give me a few hits of V and I'll devolve into Protoplasm and go 10 rounds with Ninja Gaiden Black. I'm forgiving of antagonistic design when it serves a purpose. Fear and Hunger's willingness to disproportionately punish the player for small mistakes fits with its theme. What I can't overlook is blatantly poor design. As I'm overstepping myself right into the bad section, I'm a real bag to go into structure. With a game as small as this, I'll go a bit further into detail as this was a sub-hour 30 recording session. In total, there are 7 levels split between 3 categories: Stitch, Lilo, and Vehicle. It is more like 8 as the last level has 3 sections dedicated to its own deviation, but for clarity and simplicity, there are 7 levels with 3 types to divide them up. Up first is Stitch, who has levels 1, 4, and part of 7 to himself. He's the run and gun portion of the duo. For the most part, as level 4 kinda ruffles the layout, his stages are left to right shooter action, your goal to reach the end while dealing with whatever threats in your way. Breaking it down further, Stitch's stages are split into scenes. So, for example, level 1 has 4 scenes: the beach beginning, the warehouse, the romp to the boss, and the boss itself. While most of the time you're allowed to continue traveling the path of progression, sometimes the screen locks until you defeat every threat or bypass a wall, typically in the shape of a destructible door that signifies a scene transition. Between each scene is a checkpoint, so when you finish scene 1, when you die, you start at the beginning of scene 2 as opposed to restarting the level. As I've bigged it up, it being dying, you have unlimited continues a la Ghouls and Ghosts, so the only factor keeping you from finishing Lilo and Stitch is your own tolerance for bullshit. There is no saving, however, the game passing out passwords after you beat a level. Another factor for my use of save states, as outside of this title, I can't remember the last time I played a game that didn't have a save feature and opted for passwords. I think Lost World Jurassic Park on PlayStation 1, which is beyond anachronistic and lands in archaic. Back to Stitch, he can run, jump, crouch, shoot, and throw pineapple surprises. That is his whole moveset, handled by the D-pad, A, B, and right trigger, with the last button used for him being start for pause. While Stitch has unlimited ammo in his base gun and can shoot in a number of directions, 6 in total, it operates on mashing power akin to Metal Slug 6's pistol. Either get a turbo button or enjoy red thumbs. Pineapples, meanwhile, are limited and are thrown in an arc, but can hit trickily placed foes and do a pretty hefty amount of damage, save for the 1 upgrade Stitch can get to his guns. Big Shot, as I'm gonna call it, runs on ammo pickups, but makes the plasma rounds bigger and deal far greater damage to the point of one-shotting regular goons and destroying sterner stuff with a small barrage. By the way, those are the only 2 unique pickups for Stitch's stages: Pineapples and Big Shot ammo. The others, which show up in Lilo's stages, are health in 2 colors: pink, which heals 2, blue, which is full, lives, and photos, which give you stills from the movie. While I have detailed what a regular stage for Stitch is, his second stage does have a diversion from that in its second scene because it's a tower climb. It is also the first stage of a vehicle for Stitch to control, granting him increased firepower and a second health bar, the tank blowing up when its meter hits 0. It still fires in the almost all the same directions that Stitch can, so do try to keep it alive for as much as you can. On the enemy side of things, there are around 9 flavors of threat harassing Experiment 626. They are the otters and their flying and tank versions, the octopi, jetpack flies and mosquito troops, tall clubmen, the cranes that show up in the warehouse, and dragonfly ships. For the most part, all tend to do the same thing, either stick to one location and shoot at you, or move around and shoot. All versions of otters do both, the important distinction being the flyers and tanks having more health and that tanks can one-shot you. Jetpack flies and mosquito guards usually chase after you and shoot. Octopi are stationary until the game says they can move. Dragonflies pace back and forth to fire and can also one-shot Stitch. The cranes have a control box to shoot at and don't move save for the crane, which can damage you, and the tall men can decide between firing a projectile or swinging their club based on how close you are to them. This doesn't count the bosses, which have their own strategies and movesets, like the pirate captain's ground pounds and shocking hook, the slimes' ineffective puddles and morph attacks, and Pestis's bomb throwing and slide kicks. What is noteworthy for the enemies, however, is their damage. Typically, the regular grunts, that being the normal and flying otters, the jetpack flies, and tall men, deal 1 pip of damage with their plasma bolts, but everyone else deals more than that. Getting close to a tall man has them deal 2 units of damage off a club swing. The octopi's pine launchers deal 2 with the added negative of lingering hitboxes. Mosquito guard spray and praise also deal 2 alongside most boss attacks, while tank and dragonfly shots, as mentioned previously, kill you on the spot. No character has a notable grace period except when spawning in after dying, so you can keel over before even recognizing what has killed you. Comprising stages 2 and 5 are Lilo, who switches out run and gun action for stealthy puzzle solving. Her levels are one-shot in nature. A death sends you right back to the beginning with no recourse. And as she is a little girl, Lilo isn't exactly a combat powerhouse, preferring to avoid fighting entirely. To aid in this, she has access to sneaking via the right trigger to get past sleeping or unaware foes, and the disguise via left trigger to hide in plain sight. When it works. She isn't always invulnerable when hiding, as I did suffer a death while using it one time. Not that it matters anyway. The 2 regulars in her stages, the prison guards and prisoners, deal either mortal wounds or attacks so erratically that your health bar might as well be an afterthought. The only reason why Lilo has an attack option in the first place is to deal with the mosquitoes that appear from time to time. Instead, her maze-like stages are dedicated to button pushing and completing simple logic problems or platforming. There isn't much to latch onto for Lilo, as all I can really say is that you push buttons and hope to any greater intelligence out there that you don't die from a simple mistake, because you have to do everything all over again. Same can be said for levels 3 and 6, the Starship stages. You ever play Tempest or Tempest 2000? It's almost like that, you locked in a cylindrical grid, avoiding hazards and shooting down ships. The only pickup that matters here are the ship repairs, as that's a heal. Other than that, you can play these stages with half interest, as there isn't much going on in them. Stage 7, the last level, is a mixture of a Stitch stage, as the vehicle you control in the last third might as well be a riff on the tank from Stage 4, except it can change gravity to avoid attacks by double pressing the A button, and a chase where you alternate between Lilo and Stitch to avoid hazards and run away from Pestis. For real, besides simple platforming and hope you don't get hit, as the mosquito guards here deal 3 points of damage, 4 will kill you, and Pestis is an instant kill, the only notable wrinkle is that pressing B switches between the 2 because Stitch doesn't like water and Lilo doesn't run as fast or jump as high. Good thing the game tells you that, right? But that's the game in its entirety, the complexity lying with Stitch, as the other formats feel almost slapdashed in. This is a real case of struggling to think about what's good about this game. Each time I arrive at a conclusion, the source reveals itself to be left-handed. The gunplay is fine, if Stitch could actually crouch and shoot at the same time, or had a melee option for 2 close threats. I like how the enemies look, but most are functionally the same, and the few that aren't are annoying to deal with. The very level structure is neat, but it makes the whole product feel half-baked, as the problems outweigh the positives, as it feels like including more instead of better was the thought process. Having a health bar for a run and gun ensures that you don't have to perfect play like Contra or Metal Slug. Except that enemy damage values run the gamut, and sometimes you just die instantly anyway. What a funny inclusion to have Stitch take damage from water. Except it's during the chase level where that little factoid doesn't get explained, and it looks like you take phantom damage when you shouldn't. Hey, we have a few larger-than-life bosses that are either piss easy or require a mathematical spreadsheet to determine where exactly you can stand in any given instance to avoid lingering hitboxes. When you respawn, it puts you right back into the action. But there's not a lot of collisions, so you can accidentally speedrun through a level or reach places you're not meant to. Stitch can pick up and throw boxes and wreckages, which never has a clear-cut usage and is more liable to get you killed. Heck yeah, vehicles! That give you no time to adjust to their controls as you're thrown right into the fire. About the only clear positive I can give is that the tank you get in Stitch's second stage is its own entity. One of my personal grievances with Metal Slug, I hate that you have to bail from a destroyed vehicle lest you get caught in a fiery explosion. You get far more mileage and health here in Lilo and Stitch as the tank counts as an additional bar. If I wanted to be sarcastic, I could include the bit-crushed movie clips and stills in this segment as a relic of the GBA, but it's hard to scrape the woodwork off the bottom of the barrel as is. It's short, so your suffering isn't unending. Yeah, let's disperse with the formalities before I start getting splinters. Where do I start? Well, I guess with Stitch, as Metal Slug nor Contra is this game. Honestly speaking, I'm not good at either titles, and coupled with the higher difficulty, both have frustrated me before. Yet, that is also in their nature as arcade classics. It is a breed of game we don't see that often anymore on the home front. Why a good number of early console games were balls to the walls, why NES hard is a term, is because developers only had the arcades to go off of when it came to designing and developing for consoles. Arcade games, by their very nature, are meant to take your money. But from that mindset did arcade games formulate their own philosophical doctrine. There's quite a bit of delineation in this topic, as it is rife with flashiness and feeliness. The original Mortal Kombat was rough around the edges as a fighter, but it drew players in due to the fatalities. Flashiness. On the opposite end, and where we want to put our focus on, something like Time Crisis is meticulously structured on the gameplay front. The pedal to dip in and out of cover to dodge attacks or hazards, switching between guns so you use the best option in the moment, and the scoring system creates an engaging loop that brings players new and old to it for single or co-op action. Feeliness. Basically, what I'm concluding to is that arcade games needed either to be over the top or structurally sound to bring in quarters. Some of the best arcade games did both. Marvel vs. Capcom. Relating this to Lilo and Stitch GBA, it has all the hardness, though I would argue later it's more ham-handedness, of a classic arcade game, but none of the tightness that the feeliness-minded camp laser focuses on to overlook it. A deal breaker. Stitch cannot crouch and shoot at the same time. A staple of run and gun since ever. Crouching and shooting is one of the best defensive options in a run and gun because it allows you to lay on the fire while potentially avoiding attacks. Contra locks you in place while you do it, while Metal Slug allows you to crouch walk and shoot, making the most out of the one hit that you get. I don't think I went over it in the gameplay tab, but enemies are extremely aggressive in Stitch levels. Whenever they see you, be prepared for a bullet to come your way in irregular intervals. Otters can attack whenever they want, while everyone else sticks to their own pattern, incidentally creating a bullet hell. Octopi and tallmen shoot in intervals, while mosquito troopers and jetpack flies attack when allowed, usually by being right up in your grill, which is especially easy for both. Why a crouch shot is highly valuable is because it grants you an out. You can hit an enemy who fires a standard projectile while they can't hit you. You don't have to worry about formulating the actual travel paths for bullets and attempting to jump over them if they all sail over your head. That's why enemies like the octopi exist, or in those other titles, why regular soldiers can throw grenades, to force you to move from crouching. Instead of a horizontal pattern, it's an arc with a vertical hitbox. It creates this ebb and flow where you aren't sweating the small stuff because in run and guns, grunts shouldn't be a major threat. Their challenge comes from volume, not hamstringing the player. Continuing with this, why do you think Metal Slug has a melee option? It's so you don't run into the unfortunateness of being unable to kill an enemy right on top of you, forcing the pace down to a crawl. What makes on-foot otters a hassle is that there's nothing you can do when they decide to hug Stitch's shadow, besides hope that their AI pulls them off of you or throw a pineapple, the latter of the two a waste of ammo because you need pines to land those tricky shots because you can't crouch shoot. Yes, there are enemies that crouch in this game and act as stationary turrets, and because you can't copy them, it leads into an awkward battle with the controls as you time jumping and attacking to hit their small window. Stitch's second level becomes a mosh pit as you're being assaulted on land and air. The jetpack flies attack requiring either a debate or jump to avoid, but what about the crouching otter freely firing or the tall men who punish jumping to avoid bullets? If I could crouch and shoot, I could take care of the otter who is the most pressing threat as he forces me into a 50-50 with the flying tall man when I jump, then I could crouch under the fly to deal with the tall man, then strike the behind of the fly as he misses his shot. Instead, you essentially have to play like a berserker and hope you take less damage than you expect. Why I think the health bar matters little is because you're thrust into these situations time and time again. Or as I've alluded to and spoken frankly about, enemy damage values ensure that your health bar might as well be non-existent. The first threat to bring this up as an issue are the octopi. Their pines deal 2 points of damage, killing you in 2 hits. While they may not seem bad as they rarely move, they are the most accurate enemy in the game. As soon as one appears, you have to immediately run out of their firing range because you are not avoiding the blast. Both because they fire where you're heading instead of your last position, but also because the explosion lingers for much longer than it should. Another death sentence change from Metal Slug, you can die to an octopi relatively easily because of that effect on their pine blasts and Stitch's lack of hit invulnerability. I feel that the problems of that are self-evident, but it also doesn't help that Stitch doesn't have a reliable reaction to damage. A clubbing from a tall man doesn't have Stitch wince or show any physical reaction, so you can accidentally wind up dying to one because you misjudged your distance and are having to deal with all the other nonsense on screen. Dragonflies and tanks one-shot Stitch if you're ever slightly out of position, only slightly worse than Dr. Pestis, who's a particularly long boss with a sped-up phase 2 who can two-shot you, sending you straight back to the beginning of the fight on a game over. I don't want to applaud the money-grubbing habits of arcade cabinets, but at least in Metal Slug, you respawn right where you died when you put another quarter in, or if you're playing on free play, by hitting start. Something like Root Mars becomes manageable because of this if you lack the skill. Having to repeat a phase over and over and fucking over again because you mistimed a gravity switch on a boss that punishes said slow mechanic on the basis of being faster than the switch can happen is purely unfun, and I don't feel bad for save stating. Never would I thought that I'd go up against 2 bosses that break game mechanics over their knees on the same night, but that's how I'm gonna relate Lilo and Stitch on GBA to Shadow of the Erdtree. At least Elden Ring is sound on all other fronts, even stealth. What kills the Lilo sections, besides the fact you have to bumble into her other moves as you'll need to use them to avoid death, I mean, come on, Oddworld gave us tutorials for what Abe could do, and you're basing her sections on Odyssey and Exodus digital clips, it's not that hard. is that there's no checkpointing. One tiny fuck up and bam! Straight back to the beginning with no recourse. It's 02, not 89. Hell, it should be 97, as in Oddworld's higher rating on the Mo scale, they still remembered checkpoints. Couple the issues together and it creates an air of unfairness. A beginner's trap. How was I supposed to know that to sneak past slug guards, I had to use the sneak walk? The game hasn't told me Lilo has access to that, and thus I attempt to crawl past the guard because, hey, crawling should be quieter than walking. This is where a tutorial can mitigate frustration, like when you have to use the disguise to avoid enemies. Because unless you start randomly hitting every button the controller has, you won't know what Lilo is capable of. At least Stitch has the ammo counter for pines, inferring to you that a button press uses them, while Lilo gets Bubkiss. Oh yeah, and the disguise has a few glitches to it, one noteworthy as an enemy saw right through it and zapped me back to start. I've looked at other people's footage for the game. The disguise makes you invulnerable and invisible, so I don't know what happened in this case. If I can't trust the mechanics you've laid out for me to get me through the adventure, that is the death of a game. And I certainly wish for the ROM I used to play Lilo and Stitch GBA to die, preferably in fire of the digital kind. If I had the best way to describe this game, it is a caricature or a skinwalker. All the pieces look in the proper place at a glance, but closer examination sees that the eyes are misaligned and forcibly blink. The limbs are of differing lengths and contort in on themselves. Its complexion a rancorous pallor, and the whole monstrosity puts on a show of breathing. That ain't no dog and should be taken out back, not left in the shelter. You are better off playing either Metal Slug, Contra, or any spiritual send-up to those two because all tend to do what Lilo and Stitch does, but better. What really earmarks a number of these arcade run guns is tight design. For as CBT-inducing Metal Slug and Contra can be, as both are into Findom, they couldn't afford to have a loose design philosophy. Metal Slug, Contra, Alien Hominid, and whichever game in the genre that comes to your mind as the best example are tight. In controls, in mechanics, in every nook and cranny where it matters. The difficulty in these games comes from sheer volume or actual challenge, not console limitations and flimsy craftsmanship. The screen crunch is a killer, the lingering hitboxes are killers, the beginning traps are killers, the inconsistent damage scaling is a killer, and on top of all those problems are fundamental issues in how Lilo and Stitch control, plus how the game informs you what they are capable of. If I have to consult a long play to learn about certain actions a character is able to do because the game by itself hasn't indicated what you can perform, your game is a terrible teacher to the player. How the hell did this game review well? And with that, another ghost of the past has finally been put into a proper grave. For real, I only use save states for the ease of recording. Pokemon Sapphire has some so that I wouldn't lose time, as well as having a safety net save slot in case the actual one got misplaced. Nothing sucks harder than losing progress due to outside circumstances, see Bloodborne and Fatal Frame. So for a game to get to that alien resurrection level of unfair for save states to be used, says a lot about the baffling design choices. There ain't no great shield thrusting sword combo for LNS GBA if you catch the shadow I'm casting. Anywho, this show is made possible with the likes of the moviegoers within the Peanut Gallery and Inner Circle. Consider buying a ticket at patreon.com/let's talk about games, no apostrophe in the let's, for behind the scenes access to LTA scripts, thumbnails, other bonus material, your name in the credits, and early screenings of episodes, plus the live commentary Showtime Reels where I ramble my way through games gone by. As said at the top, like, comment, subscribe, share, or don't, I ain't your Uncle Nurgle. And as always, this showing of Lilo and Stitch is over, but stay tuned for our next feature. The first proper look America had into Berserk. Sword of the Berserk, Guts' Rage.